Welcome to the Insomnia Coach podcast. My name is Martin Reed. I believe that nobody needs to live with chronic insomnia and that evidence-based cognitive and behavioral techniques can help you enjoy better sleep for the rest of your life. The content of this podcast is provided for informational and educational purposes only. It's not medical advice and is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease, disorder, or medical condition. It should never replace any advice given to you by your physician or any other licensed healthcare provider. Insomnia Coach LLC offers coaching services only and does not provide therapy, counseling, medical advice, or medical treatment. The statements and opinions expressed by guests are their own and are not necessarily endorsed by Insomnia Coach LLC. All content is provided as is and without warranties, either express or implied. Sally had been living with insomnia for 60 years and had been taking sleeping pills for 10 years. She believed that she would never be able to sleep properly. But this all changed when she started to change the way she thought about sleep and began to implement new sleep-related behaviors that made it easier for her body to generate and sustain sleep. Sally used to average around 3 hours of sleep each night. She now averages around 7 hours of sleep each night and barely thinks about sleep. In this episode, Sally shares what she did to improve her sleep after living with insomnia for 60 years. If Sally was able to improve her sleep, you can too. A full transcript of this podcast and an accompanying video can be found at insomniacoach.com/podcast. Hi, Sally. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today.
Thank you, Martin. It's nice to meet you at last.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been talking through email for quite some time.
Yeah.
Not really. So this is really the first time we're meeting, so to speak. So yeah, it's good to see you too.
Yes.
So let's just start right at the beginning. That's what I like to do before all these podcast discussions. Can you tell us a little bit about when your sleep problems first began? And if you can think, or if you have any recollection onto what that initial trigger was that led to sleep disruption.
I can't actually think of a trigger, but I've had insomnia nearly all my life. I'm not sure what the trigger ever was because I've had it since I was a child. I must have been about 8 years old when I was frantic about not getting enough sleep. I'm worried that if I didn't get enough sleep, I won't be able to get through the school day. And that was at a very young age.
Wow.
And my parents were concerned enough to take me to a therapist at that time. I don't remember too much about the therapist, but I do remember him with a slide projector. And he was explaining to me that I shouldn't worry about sleep. It wasn't that important, and that a lot of people didn't sleep wonderfully, but it wasn't the end of the world. And I remember he showed me a slide of Winston Churchill, and I'm very old, way before your time, who only used a cat nap, and he was perfectly all right. And he showed me various other people, and I think it did help me. It did help me. To talk with a therapist at that time. I didn't have a major problem with it, but I was witness to insomnia because my parents were both addicted to sleeping tablets. Remember, they were taking lorazepam, and they every single night at 9 o'clock, my father would make my mother a cup of tea, and they would take their sleeping tablets. So I'd witnessed that growing up all my life, and so it's possibly something that I picked up on in an early age, that sleep can be a problem. It wasn't any trauma that happened to me in school. I'm pretty sure it wasn't, because I liked school. And as I went through my teens and 20s, my mother would occasionally give me a couple of tablets in case I had a bad night. It was always on my mind. But so I always had this thing about sleeping tablets, and I was okay until in my 20s. We moved abroad, my husband and I.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was very unsettled because I'm not the kind of person who likes change so much. And I had problems there. And his cousin was a pharmacist and he used to get medicine for me. So I always had them. I tried not to take them regularly.
Mm-hmm.
So I always had them. So I've just had this ongoing relationship with sleeping tablets. And then time went on. I was taking them intermittently. And then 10 years ago, we moved from the UK to Spain. Half the year here and half the year in Spain. That's how it was happening.
Yeah.
And I had been to the doctor with my sleep problems, and he in London, and he gave me like 14 tablets for ages. I mean, I couldn't go back and get more, but they were to last me really. So I tried to sleep normally. I took over the counter tablets. I often have very bad nights. And then when I was desperate, I would count down to the days I could take one of my tablets.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came to Spain, I went to the doctor here because I'd heard they were quite free with the tablets. So I went to the doctor and I said, "Doctor, I'm having such bad sleeping problems." And he said, "That's terrible." He said, "I'll give you something." So he gave me like a packet of 30 Zopiclone.
Mm-hmm.
I already had some in reserve from my doctor in London, and neither knew what was going on. So I had these Zopiclone, and just knowing I had the drugs, that I would eventually sleep. I thought, well, if I don't sleep for 2 or 3 nights, I've got a tablet,
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to eke it out as long as possible. And then that's how it was running. And then a couple of years ago, I started getting addicted to them. And the tablets, I couldn't sleep without a tablet. So I've been actually, before I met you, I've been almost constantly on a tablet a night.
Mm-hmm.
And getting myself really freaked out because I would check the internet to see how bad they were for me, how damaging. And then I read terrible things about having Zopiclone is terrible. I wish I'd never taken them. I couldn't get off Zopiclone. And, I was so worried about withdrawal symptoms. I was really getting quite neurotic about it, but I couldn't do much about it. And then by the time I spoke to you, I'd lost faith in the fact I didn't think I could ever sleep again.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought I could sleep naturally. And so, and the worst thing was with the tablets that they didn't help me really, because the next day I felt terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I had been living in a fog. Now, I had been living in a fog for so long because they made me feel really groggy and not really 100% there, not focused.
Mm-hmm.
And also gave me some anxiety, I think. And then I looked it up to see if you can get anxiety from sleeping tablets, and it said you can't. Some people said you can, and it's just been terrible. But so that was it really. And then I had to increase the dose, which was the worst thing, because they weren't working in the current dose. And that was the point I met you really. So
yeah.
Oh,
yeah, well, that's quite a journey that you've been on there. I think that the issue that there can be with sleeping pills or even just supplements, whenever we take something in a bid to improve our sleep, it's never really a long-term solution because it doesn't get to the actual problem itself, like the root of the problem, the issue that is making sleep difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And they can, depending on what you take, the chemical formula, it can increase the likelihood of sleep, but they'll never actually generate sleep itself, because the only thing that generates sleep is your own body.
Yeah.
So what pills and supplements can do is help lower that initial barrier, or that initial obstacle to sleep, which is often worry about sleep,
Yeah.
or worry about, I'm not going to sleep. What if I don't sleep? And so by kind of taking the edge off that anxiety, it makes it a bit easier to sleep. So you tend to sleep a little bit better. But the problem is you just associate all that sleep you then got with the pill or the supplement or with whatever you took, rather
Yeah.
than recognizing that all that sleep was sleep that you generated, your body generated all by itself. And so another reason why they're a short-term solution is because when you have that belief you can only sleep with a pill or with a supplement, as soon as you then stop taking it, if you've done nothing to address what the actual problem is,
Yeah.
more likely than not, all those sleep problems come flooding back as soon as you stop taking or you reduce your dose or make any changes.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I think you touched upon something good as well that's important, is, that grogginess, those side effects from pills or supplements, it's really easy to also associate all those side effects with poor sleep, or that there's something wrong with your sleep. You can feel that, oh, there's definitely something wrong. I'm getting non-restorative sleep. I'm getting sleep, but I
Yeah.
don't feel good in the morning.
No.
And it's really easy to blame that on your sleep when it could be whatever that pill or supplement you're taking is that's leading to that. So it's kind of this double-edged
Yeah.
sword, and it
Yeah.
never usually leads to a long-term resolution,
No.
when you end up there.
Mm.
So what was a typical night like for you, back in those days when you were kind of taking those pills and worrying about sleep? How would you describe a typical night?
Well, I go to bed worried. I didn't look forward to going to bed.
Mm,
I was I wondered whether I would sleep, and I was just focused on sleeping, and invariably I didn't, or I did fall into an exhausted sleep. But then I thought, well, 3 more nights I can take a tablet. But I
mm,
was very anxious and worried, and I was hot and sweaty,
mm,
and I scanned the Insomnia sites for tips. And I, I tell you, during at the right time in this interview, I what I did. A lot of the things that I read online just didn't work, and I thought
mm,
it must be me. But they say it's tried and tested, and every time you see an article about um, how to get sleep better, they give a list of things to do, and I tried everything, and they some of them didn't work. I mean, a lot of them are common sense, like have a cool room,
mm.
etc., or maybe have a warm bath before. But a lot of the other things didn't help me. Um, and yeah, it was really, really bad.
Yeah.
I just never thought that I would sleep properly or sleep without help.
Did you tend to find that it was difficult falling asleep at the start of the night, or was it more to do with waking during the night and then finding it hard to
No,
fall back to sleep?
no, it's the actually getting to sleep.
Just falling asleep, yeah.
Yeah, falling asleep.
And so you mentioned, you tried these different things. Sounds like based on sleep hygiene,
Yeah,
these environmental things, and that is very common. I think it's one of the first things that people who have insomnia try,
yeah,
because that's what all the information out there is. Well, most of the information out there is based on sleep hygiene. But the
yeah,
problem we have with sleep hygiene is it's more of a preventative set of techniques, um, that that are more for people that are kind of burning the candle at both ends, that are aren't prioritizing sleep.
no,
I think it's, in a way, it's a little bit like dental hygiene, or brushing your teeth. So you brush your teeth to keep your teeth healthy, but once you've got that cavity, no amount of brushing is going to
no,
get rid of
no,
that cavity. And really, that's what sleep hygiene is like. It's good as a preventative technique, perhaps, but
yeah,
once you have insomnia and you're struggling, you're kind of past that, and these sleep hygiene techniques aren't really going to do much. But what they can do, which you alluded to, is when you then try them, you can worry that there's something unique about your insomnia, that there's something
Yeah.
seriously wrong, because everyone is telling you to do this sleep hygiene stuff and
Yeah.
you're doing it, and
Exactly.
your sleep is not responding
No.
to it, and it can just lead to more worry. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that you touched upon that, because I think most people listening to this are probably familiar with sleep hygiene, maybe tried
Mm.
it, and maybe that led to more worry, this thought that there's something unique about their insomnia when it's not. It, and even when they do like clinical studies looking at people with insomnia and different interventions, they use sleep hygiene as the control group, because in the scientific community, people that are familiar with insomnia, we know that sleep hygiene doesn't do anything for people with chronic insomnia. Once you've
No.
got chronic insomnia, sleep hygiene is just ineffective.
No.
So we actually use that as a control group when we do
Yeah.
studies, because it's known. So yeah, I think that's helpful, and I'm really glad you touched upon that, because I think a lot of people will identify with your experience there. So you mentioned the sleep hygiene. Was there any other things that you'd done, or was there any kind of ways that maybe you were modifying your life, in response
Yeah.
to difficult nights, or in a bid to try and improve your sleep?
Well, socially, it impacted our social life, because if we made arrangements with friends, I want to go early, make it earlier rather than later,
Mm,
especially if we have the restaurant booking. And it's not easy in Spain, because in Spain people don't eat until about 9:30. But I would worry that if we ate, so if we had such a late night, then I wouldn't have enough time to sleep. It was always on my mind.
mm,
Um, how many, when I could get back to bed to try and sleep, and then sleep that I can't sleep.
yeah.
So it does impact my social life. Worries about going on holiday and to hotels for exactly the same reason. I'm wondering whether I had enough sleeping tablets for the hotel, because I would definitely be taking one every night, because it was unfamiliar. But it really impacted, my life. I have got a list of things I wrote, if you don't mind me
I'll
reading,
go for
because
it.
there were so many of them. Okay, I told you I searched the insomnia sites. And it was on my mind all the time, sleep. I'm jealous of good sleepers. My
Mm,
husband's an amazing sleeper. I'm so jealous of him.
mm,
Really, he can just fall asleep on the sofa or anywhere. Yeah. Um, I tried no technology, but for 2 hours before bed. I've got a special flickering blue light, which is, I don't know. I don't know where it is, actually. I think I used it once or twice. It didn't work. It's
mm,
a light that kind of dims. It comes on and dims, and you're supposed to look at the light, but it never worked. I had tried herbal drugs, melatonin, L-theanine or something, valerian, acupuncture. I had acupuncture up to quite recently for insomnia. It didn't help a jot. I slept so badly the night after I'd had it. Meditation, I tried so much meditation, but it just doesn't work for me.
mm,
White noise, motivational notes. Um, yes, and I freaked out once. It was about 2 years ago. Well, maybe it was a bit longer now. Leonard Cohen is one of my favorite singers,
mm,
and he was playing in Paris. We were with friends, and he was going to be playing. It was a really late concert. He was starting at about 11 at night, and I watched the first half, and he was going to finish at about 4. It was very late. It was a night concert. I didn't stay for the second half because I
oh
wanted
wow.
to get back to bed,
Mm,
and I didn't sleep because we had a flight the next morning, and I was so worried about not being able to sleep. Whereas our friends just stayed and didn't care if they got sleep or not.
yeah.
Yeah, so I did try all that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really common. I think a lot of people are going to identify with everything you've just said there. It's completely natural that we're going to want to try all these different experiments, in a
Yeah.
bid to improve our sleep, because as I say many times, pretty much everything in life responds positively to effort, so
Yeah.
when we struggle with sleep, our natural inclination is to put effort into it, to troubleshoot, to
Yeah.
solve the problem. But
Yeah.
often what happens is we then, as soon as we put effort into sleep, we kind of imply that we can control sleep. And as soon as we go down that rabbit hole of trying to control sleep, sleep becomes close to
Yeah.
impossible. It becomes really
Yeah.
difficult. And so when we engage in all these different experiments, they're really helpful just because, if nothing else, our brain has to stay alert to monitor for the results of those
Yeah.
experiments.
Yes, it's
So
true.
anytime
Yeah.
you try something, you get into bed and you're thinking, okay, I tried this today.
Yeah,
Let's
exactly.
see if I can sleep.
Exactly. Yeah.
And as soon as you start there, it makes sleep more difficult. Um, and and we can also end up following this process, which you just hinted at, where we start to remove all these enjoyable moments and experiences and positive opportunities from our life because we're worried
Yeah.
how they might affect our sleep. And so the end result there is we become more worried and more concerned about sleep, put more pressure on ourselves to sleep
Yeah.
because we're associating sleep with a negative outcome. So for
Yeah.
example, I can't finish watching this concert because
Mm.
it might impact my sleep. So
Yes.
you miss out on that.
Yeah.
You still don't sleep well anyway, but then you've associated sleep with missing out on watching that
Yeah.
concert that you really
Yeah.
would have enjoyed and would have added enjoyment
Right.
to your life. And um, all of these behaviors and thought processes and experiments are all completely understandable and justifiable. We shouldn't feel bad that we went down that route because, as I said, everything else in life probably would have responded well, but sleep
Mm-hmm.
works differently. And as soon as we engage in these experiments and trying to modify our days or compensate for
Yeah.
sleep, it can actually make sleep more difficult because it implies that we can somehow control sleep.
Yeah. It's true.
So yeah, so leading on from that, this is why these cognitive and behavioral techniques that I talk about are just so helpful because they address
Yeah.
all these thoughts that we have, the behaviors that we often implement in
Yeah.
response to poor sleep, and these end up perpetuating insomnia, making it more
Yeah.
difficult for our sleep to recover.
Yeah.
Mainly because these thoughts and these behaviors, they can disrupt our sleep drive, just our
Yeah.
natural propensity to sleep. They can disrupt our internal body clock, and probably the big one, which everyone will identify with, is they can heighten arousal. Just activate the mind, fire up all those thought
Yeah.
processes and that
Yeah.
worry. So I know. So for that reason, when I work with people, that's something that I really focus time and attention on. So when you learned about that, the influence that our thoughts and our behaviors can have on sleep, I'm sure that you were probably able to identify things you'd done, which you just touched upon in a bid to improve your sleep and
Yeah.
somehow cope with insomnia that might have actually been making sleep more difficult.
Yeah. I didn't realize.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Um,
you just mentioned all those kind of experiments and canceling plans with friends and like
yeah.
modifying your days. Do you notice like other behaviors creeping in, think that are quite common among people with insomnia? That I think common ones are things like spending more time in bed, spending a really long time in bed, maybe going to bed earlier, staying in bed later, maybe napping
Yeah.
during the day, things like that. Were they familiar to you?
Yes, I did try to nap in an afternoon.
Mm,
Um, and I don't know really. I was just miserable though, it
yeah,
made me very miserable and short-tempered, and I wasn't very easy to live with. But I was spending a lot of time during the day on the internet in the bid to find out other things
yeah,
which might help me that I hadn't actually tried. Um, I was pretty desperate, and my husband would bless us the ground you walk on. He's never seen I said, how long do you think I've had this pen? He said, you've had it all your life, all your married life anyway, as long as he's known me.
Yeah.
He's really happy. And yeah.
Yeah, I kind of touched upon this when I asked you that question about this arousal, and how this can really perpetuate sleep problems.
Yes.
And there's arousal isn't always anxiety. I like to say there's kind of three branches of arousal. So we have this cognitive arousal, and this is kind of just worry, sleep related worry. And it can often not be restricted to the night. We can find ourselves worrying about sleep throughout the day.
Yeah.
And then we have this kind of physiological arousal, just like the physical symptoms of it. And you touched upon this earlier, you would get into bed and feel really hot, for example.
Yeah. Yes.
Just that the way our body responds to this heightened arousal.
Yeah.
And we can also have this conditioned arousal where we kind of just learn that the bed or sleep is unpleasant. So we might actually feel sleepy during the day or the early evening when we know it's not bedtime. But then as soon as we get into bed, it's like we're wide awake. And it might not be that we're worried, but we just feel wide awake and we just have lost that sense of sleepiness.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so all those kind of three branches of arousal, they feed in and they perpetuate the problem. And so this is why taking steps to address these thought processes and the behaviors that we implement to help set the stage for sleep and reduce the power of the arousal system can just be really helpful in terms of improving your sleep for the long term, because they really get to the core problem that's generating sleep difficulties. So anyway, moving on, I remember, when you first started submitting those sleep logs, you were spending about 8 hours in bed at night, but you really weren't getting even close to 8 hours of sleep. I think it was closer to about 3 hours of sleep each night that first week. And that's common again among people with insomnia. We'll often allot the amount of time for sleep that we want to be spending asleep rather than how much sleep we're getting. And this usually just means more time awake during the night, which is unpleasant, and it can increase this arousal. More time to worry about sleep just doesn't feel good. We're reinforcing that negative association between the bed and being awake instead of asleep. And so we have this technique known as sleep restriction, probably better phrased as bedtime restriction, because we're not restricting the amount of sleep you get. We're just trying to restrict the amount of time you spend in bed to get a little bit closer to the amount of time that you actually spend asleep on an average night. And that reduces the amount of time you spend awake, helps build sleep drive during the day. So when you first learned about this technique, this sleep restriction technique, what were your thoughts on that? Did it feel appealing to you, or did the idea of spending less time in bed not feel very appealing or attractive?
No, I'd heard about it, sleep restriction, and it's something I hadn't actually tried. But it was hard to do. It was easier to do it when you know that you have someone who understands, who is leading it, basically, sort of telling you what to do, and that you were there, basically, Martin. And it was the most difficult thing about it was with the sleep restriction was also because I was doing the sleep restriction and I was also giving up the sleeping tablets, so that wasn't very easy to begin with. But I got over that in surprisingly quickly. A couple of days of not sleeping very well. I remember one night, the first few nights I was sleeping 2 or 3 hours, and then there was a completely sleepless night. But then I'd also stopped. I prepared myself for a miserable week, and I stopped the sleeping tablets as well. But it was quite amazing. By the end of that first week, really very quickly, I was feeling a lot better. I wasn't taking a tablet, and it was actually working on me. And one thing I have realized since I did that, the sleep restriction, is that I was going to bed too early. And now my bedtime has kind of set itself into a mean time, which is much later than I normally would have gone to bed.
Yeah.
And so actually I'm getting a longer evening because I'm not obsessing about sleeping and I'm enjoying my evenings. I can feel my eyes closing within about half an hour, and I'm really sleeping so well. It's April now, and I started this, I think, is it November? Or November or December I started with you. And it took a while, but I can honestly say that, it's so good.
Yeah, that's great. You did get really noticeable improvements really quickly from
I did.
bedtime restriction, from allotting less time for sleep. Not everyone gets results that quickly. It's
I know.
important to recognize that some people it takes a few weeks. To recognize that sense of sleepiness, to start spending less time awake during the night. But I think once you notice those improvements, it can just be so reassuring, to recognize that sleep drive is there. And when you can recognize it, that you do have the ability to sleep. If you spend enough time awake, you will always sleep, no matter how intense your anxiety or your arousal is. Sleep always happens in the end. And you touched upon getting that sensation of sleepiness back.
Amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And because I think the primary symptom associated with insomnia is fatigue. So we just feel worn out and run down, and it's really easy to confuse fatigue with sleepiness and go to bed because we recognize fatigue, thinking that we're sleepy. And then when we don't fall asleep because we're not sleepy enough for sleep, we then worry that we're not going to fall asleep, and it starts that whole chain reaction of this hyperarousal and this active mind, which makes sleep more difficult. It's really good that you touched upon how satisfying and how good it felt to feel that sense of sleepiness again. You mentioned that week was difficult, that first week.
Maybe the first couple of weeks, actually.
Yeah, and I think were there any nights where you just didn't get any sleep, or you just got really little sleep? Yeah, how do you get through that? How do you get through that? So it's one thing to kind of have faith or belief in these techniques, but when you're so concerned about sleep, when you've had insomnia for such a long period of time, you start implementing these new techniques. When you get that night of no sleep, it's so easy to believe that, the technique's not going to work, or you're beyond help, or there's something unique. How do you keep looking forward and, stay consistent? How did you do that?
Well, I accept that sometimes I don't believe that everybody, even the best sleeper, sleeps well every single night. There are bad nights. Sometimes my husband, for instance, will have a sleepless night. And he's a good sleeper normally. And so I don't think that it's a given that you're going to sleep well for the rest of your life. But it's more of the acceptance that you won't sleep well. And if now if I have a bad night, and I was keeping my diary, and I know now that if I have 0 hours a night, which hasn't happened very often, but it has happened a few times, just don't worry about it, and I'll sleep well the next night. And if not, then by night 3 definitely, because but it's never happened really 2 sleepless nights in a row. But it's quite amazing how with no sleep you can sleep. And I mean, doctors, you can be awake the next day. And I mean, doctors do it all the time, and many people who don't get great amount of sleep, and they have to be focused. And I just don't worry about it. I don't have a worry of insomnia now, so it's not a problem.
Yeah, I think that can be really helpful, just recognizing that no one has perfect sleep every single night. Even people that don't even think about sleep, they're going to have difficult nights from time to time.
Sure.
Sometimes there's an obvious explanation for it. Sometimes there's not. But the fact is the body always compensates for this by itself, and so we can have remarkably good days or feel remarkably full of energy after very little sleep or even no sleep.
Yeah, amazing.
but it's when we try and get involved in the process, when we start to troubleshoot or try and conserve energy during the day, remove enjoyable activities from our day that can perpetuate the issue. When you get to that point where you can just recognize that the body will take care of this by itself. And during this time, I might have nights of less sleep than I want to get. I might even have nights of no sleep whatsoever.
Yeah.
But as long as I try and remove myself from the process of trying to sleep as much as possible, the body will take care of it, and sleep will almost always get back on track all by itself.
Yes, I mean, no. In the past, well, I would give myself a limit. Like, if I'm not asleep by 2 a.m., then I'm going to take a tablet. So, kind of just give me this limit. Never seeing it through, never allowing myself to see it through, whether I slept or not. Not giving myself the chance to do that. So it was the push. This course was the push I needed to test myself, really.
Yeah, that is one of the issues, when we take pills or supplements contingently, so if we have this plan that I'll only take it if I'm up at 2 a.m. or if I'm really struggling, because then what happens is you miss that opportunity to credit any sleep you get with your own natural ability to sleep. And especially if you reach for that pill or that supplement after a really difficult night, or during a really difficult night, or after a really difficult stretch, because at that point, sleep drive is really strong. So your natural propensity to sleep, your natural urge to sleep is going to be really intense anyway. So the chances are you're going to sleep because you've just been awake for so long. But what happens is you reach for that X, whatever it is, you reach for that pill, that supplement, and then when you do sleep, you believe that you only slept because of that pill or that supplement, so all that kind of sleep drive you've been built, that opportunity for you to get that reassurance that your sleep drive is there, it's working for you, you can sleep, is continually eroded when we just reach for things on a contingent basis. So I think, you said that you started to go to bed a little bit later in the night. You started to get that sense of sleepiness, felt really good. And another aspect of this bedtime restriction is getting out of bed by this consistent out of bedtime in the morning.
Yeah.
How did you do with that? Was this something that you did anyway? Got out of bed at the same time every day? Was this something you had to really work
on? No, because I'm retired, so I didn't really have to. That was the one good thing, that I'm retired. Then I thought, well, if I don't sleep till really late, then I can lie in and that sort of thing. So it was quite hard in the beginning. Yes, I set my alarm for 9 o'clock in the morning, but it was good because no matter how I slept, I planned my day. I didn't let myself lay in or go back to sleep, or or try to sleep. It was it was really good. I felt better because I was actually doing something about it, and I wasn't doing it on my own. I mean, I could have tried it on my own, and I don't think it would have worked. But the fact that I had to report to you, and actually start a diary and make a note of the hours, and I needed the support. Basically, what I realized is I needed the right support with my sleep, with my insomnia, and up to date, I'd never found it.
Yeah, it can be trying to stick to that consistent out of bedtime can just be so helpful, just because it gives first of all, it just gives our body clock this consistent morning anchor, so it's better able to be aware of when it's time to be awake and when it's time to be asleep. And if you get out of bed by the same time every day, don't go to bed before a certain time every day, you're making sure that there's enough time during the day for sleep drive to build to a strong enough level to help you sleep at night. So it can feel really good on those nights, when your alarm goes off and it feels like you just fell asleep. An hour ago you just fell asleep, and you're capable of getting like another 4 hours.
Yeah.
So there's that temptation to just turn the alarm off, get those 4 hours of sleep. But the problem is, it feels great at the time, but you're
Yeah.
almost setting yourself up for sleep disruption the following night, because there's going to be that amount less time for you to build that sleep drive to help you sleep
Yeah.
for the following night. So it really is this, you kind of have to make this deal with yourself that there might be a little bit of short-term pain. You might miss out on a little bit of that morning
Yeah.
sleep, but in return, you're going to enjoy long-term
Yeah.
improvements, more consistent
Yeah.
sleep and better sleep really for the rest of your life. So
Yeah.
sometimes when you put it in that perspective, it's worth the trade-off.
Yes.
Do you have any tips for people in terms of sticking to that consistent out of bed time? Because especially when you first try to stick to that consistent out
Yeah.
of bed time, it can just be so hard, especially if you think that you're capable of getting a bit more sleep.
Yes, I know what you mean.
How do you stay consistent with that? Do you have any tips for people? What did you do? How did you manage to keep that really strong morning anchor time?
Well, I set myself, I try to fill my diary, and even if I wasn't busy, um, to really have structure to the day.
Mm.
I know that it's not going to, it may not be easy in the beginning. It can be very hard. I would imagine maybe some people give up. I really don't know.
Mm.
I hope not. But honestly, it's so worth sticking to it. It really is worth sticking to it, because it really, really does work. And I have heard before that it works. I've read about it, but I've never actually had the opportunity to try it myself. And I think that you have to believe in it, and it really does work to reset your sleep clock.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just have faith, basically.
Yeah, I think you touched upon a really important point. If you can add some kind of structure or some kind of routine
Yeah.
to your life, because the temptation is to conserve energy and remove activity from your life because
Yes,
you've got
exactly.
that intense fatigue.
Yeah.
But this just leads to less structure in your day. So there's
Yeah.
more of that temptation to stay in bed for longer.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, there's more time during the day when your mind has
Yeah.
nothing else to do apart
Yeah.
from think and worry about sleep. I actually see people, I talk to people all the time that have been struggling with sleep, and they have retirement coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And they think that once I retire, everything will be great. But then they find their sleep gets worse upon retirement
Yeah.
because there's no longer that
Yeah.
structure in the day.
Yeah.
There's not that obligation to get out of bed to go
No.
to work.
Yes.
And so you just you tend to spend more time in bed. You spend more time without those daytime distractions.
Yeah.
So you're thinking about sleep more and worrying about sleep more.
Yeah.
So it can be really helpful to make sure that you are still filling your day or engaging in positive activities during the day.
Yeah.
It doesn't all have to be really intense physical
Yeah.
activity. Being physically active is obviously good anyway, but you don't have to be kind of
Yeah.
training for a marathon or anything.
Yeah.
But just adding these moments and activities to your day that make you feel good, that give you a
Yeah.
sense of enjoyment, a sense of enrichment, of reward. And not only does this help you feel better, it means there's less time for your mind to think and worry about sleep. And especially if you make the effort to pursue these kind of things after a bad night of sleep, it
Yes,
can help
definitely.
you recognize that the quality of your sleep doesn't 100% dictate the quality of your day, that you can have a
No.
difficult night, but a good day, because
You can.
ultimately we are the ones in control of what we do during the day. And if we do things that
Yes.
make us feel good, we're going to feel good. And we can then recognize that sleep is maybe not quite as important in our lives as
Mhm.
we've always thought it would be.
Yeah, it's true. I have a dog, and so he's inspiration for me to get up anyway, and he's really enjoying his early morning walks. But one thing I find that is helped me a lot is, well, me a bit or a lot really, is mindfulness. I'm very mindful now.
Mm.
Now I'm feeling so much better. I'm just I tried to be mindful when I had insomnia, but I think my brain was so clouded by the drugs or the tiredness or fatigue.
Yeah.
But now I'm so much more alert, and there's so many beautiful things around us outside,
Hmm.
and it's just lovely, you
Yeah.
know.
I completely agree. And, mindfulness or any relaxation technique is a skill.
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah,
important to recognize that it does take practice,
yeah,
regardless of what your preferred method of relaxation is. It's actually
yeah,
a skill. It's like riding a
yeah,
bike. The first few times you try it, it's not going to
yeah,
do much for you. And the goal of any relaxation technique should always just be relaxation, not sleep,
yeah.
because we can't
So,
control sleep in any way.
no,
But yeah, this idea of mindfulness, just being present, it can just be
yeah,
so helpful, because when we can recognize that so much of our worries and our anxiety in life is to do with what hasn't happened yet or what might happen in the future,
yeah,
um, it can really help us recognize that a lot of the thoughts that we have and a lot of the worries we have are based on things that haven't even happened yet or might not
yeah,
even ever happen.
exactly,
So
exactly.
I don't know, like an example, if you're going to speak at a conference, let's say you've got a conference in a month's time and you're going to be giving a speech, and you find that, and that conference, you're speaking for, say, 15 minutes. So really 15 minutes of
Yeah,
pressure. But the problem
yeah,
is you're thinking and worrying about that upcoming conference for an hour or two every day for like 2 months leading up to
yeah,
it. And
yeah,
so when you can recognize this idea of mindfulness, well, why am I worrying about that now? That's two
yeah,
months down the line.
yeah,
How about
yeah,
I just try and be focused on the now,
yeah,
like right this second?
yeah,
And when you can kind of think about that some more, you do recognize how much mental energy and worry is used thinking about things that haven't happened or might not even ever
yeah,
happen. It is pretty incredible.
yeah. It's true. Yes.
How did you get into mindfulness, by the way? Were there any kind of books that you read or other kind of
Yeah,
research?
I've read quite a lot of mindfulness, mindful books, because when I had anxiety, it was recommended to me by my therapist, and also I read on the Insomnia sites that it can help
Mm,
you with insomnia. And so, oh, I know. And the acupuncturist I went to for insomnia, she she told me about a podcast head. I can't remember the name of it, but a series. It was an app,
mm,
and it was really good. It was really good. Well, but just for the mindfulness of it, not for I'm not talking from the insomnia point of view. But it was, so I did kind of practice it quite a lot.
mm.
And I don't know if I do it right, but I tend to I walk a lot, and here, I'm in Spain at the moment. There's so many beautiful things to look at, and
Mm.
I do find it slows me down, and it really does keep me calm.
Yeah. Well,
Headspace, it's called Headspace.
headspace,
Yeah,
yeah. Mhm.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think it can just be really helpful. We often it's that worry about a difficult night of sleep
yeah,
that is more challenging than the actual difficult night of sleep itself.
yeah,
It's we find that you can find that you spend hours during the day thinking and worrying about what's going to happen tonight,
yeah,
whereas what you could be doing perhaps instead is adding positive moments to your day, enjoyable
yeah,
activities to your day. Um, because tonight is tonight. Tonight hasn't happened yet. It's in the future. And we can't predict the future anyway.
no,
You might have a bad night, absolutely, but you might not have a bad night. But if you're
yeah,
spending the whole day worrying about the bad night,
yeah,
that can often be the biggest challenge, perhaps
yeah,
even more than any potential difficult night itself.
yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I really appreciate the time that you've spared for this discussion. I think a lot of people are going to find it really helpful. So thank you for that. I do like to always end these podcasts with the same kind of question. So I'm going to pose it to you as well. If someone with chronic insomnia is listening and feels as though they've tried everything, that they're beyond help, they can't do anything to improve their sleep, what would you tell them?
Well, I'm 69 years old, and I had insomnia nearly all my life, over 60 years. I never ever believed that I would be able to sleep properly. And I did put my faith in Martin, and having his support. And the program itself is absolutely excellent. I would never have believed it would have worked as well as it did. I still can't believe it. So really, you should give it a go, because I'm pretty sure that he'd be able to help you as well.
That's really kind of you, Sally.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
I think it's ultimately, all I act as is the guide. I can give
Yeah,
people information and support them in terms of making the behavioral changes that can be really helpful. So I think it's important for you to make sure you give yourself credit, because you're
yeah.
the one that did all the work,
Thank
put all
you.
the effort into improving
Thank
your
you.
sleep in a constructive way. And now, because all these techniques are really skill based, it's like you said yourself, you now have this toolbox at your disposal.
Yeah,
So anytime sleep disruption might return for a prolonged period of time, because we know that a
yeah,
bad night of sleep every now and then is normal. But
yeah,
if your sleep isn't getting back on track by itself, now you know exactly what to do, because you've
yeah.
got this toolbox of techniques that you can just re-implement to get your sleep back on track. They worked for you in the past, and they can
Yeah,
work for you again. And that in itself can just be really reassuring.
yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. I know a lot of people listening to this are going to relate to your story. And because you are successful, then that means that they can be successful too. So thank you. Thanks for listening to the Insomnia Coach podcast. If you're ready to implement evidence-based cognitive and behavioral techniques to improve your sleep, but think you might need some additional support and guidance, I would love to help. There are 2 ways we can work together. First, you can get my online coaching course. This is the most popular option. My course combines sleep education with individualized coaching and is guaranteed to improve your sleep. You will learn new ways of thinking about sleep and implement better sleep habits over a period of 8 weeks. This gives you time to build sleep confidence and notice results without feeling overwhelmed. You can get the course and start right now at insomniacoach.com/online. I also offer a phone coaching package where we start with a 1-hour call. This can be voice only or video, your choice, and we come up with an initial 2-week plan that will have you implementing cognitive and behavioral techniques that will lead to long-term improvements in your sleep. You get unlimited email-based support and guidance for 2 weeks after the call, along with a half-hour follow-up call at the end of the 2 weeks. You can book the phone coaching package at insomniacoach.com/phone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Insomnia Coach podcast. I'm Martin Reed, and as always, I'd like to leave you with this important reminder. You can sleep.